I want to ask you, how is it that after everything you have done, right, in your research, and the way you think about Documenta 15 as a possibility for a different understanding of the world, of history, of collective, participatory, collaborative work, you end up with a historicist, 30 minutes historicist discussion of what happened, as if one thing happened, as if we can say that those things happened. If I would write that timeline, I would start with 1965, with Suharto coming to power. And what happened, so I would start with an Indonesian history, because this is, right, that's what we said. This is the first time, or we're talking, Oliver talked about the way in which Documenta has this trajectory of provincializing Europe, of decentralization of the exhibition. So let's decentralize also our research about it, our understanding of it. So the history of Documenta 15 is not the history of Germany and the German perception of Documenta 15. It might be the history of Indonesia. It might start with in 1965 that occurs in different places in the exhibition. And in Suharto rising to power, and what happened there in Indonesia and in the international forces that help him to rise into power, to kill his opponents. We know that more than almost 500,000 of people were killed in 1965, 1966. We saw that because we saw the Tarang Padi works that relate to that. And we know that also the very controversial work that was taken down was actually related to 1965 and to U.S. and Israeli forces that collaborated with Suharto in 1965. Okay. So I'm saying, you know, this is history, but this is a very, very, I would say, very biased understanding of what is.
Can I not? I mean, I think you would be totally right if we would not have all taken care that most of the time we really speak with Ruangrupa, on what Ruangrupa presents, on what it means, on their vocabulary, and on their timelines. I think this is the most important of what we have done today, and I think also of what we should. That's why it was very important for me that the main part of my talk, and would have, if you would not have done these very beautiful presentations, would have taken 3 times the time. So I have prepared, I could have spoken about Documenta 15 without any timeline at all, for more than 2 hours, and also we did it. This is very important, we did it, we have to do it. Beside that, so I just proposed to give a contextualization of what happened in Germany in the very specific context in which some people feel threatened. Ruangrupa feels threatened. So I want to tell you, hey, what is the context in which they feel threatened? If I don't put it on the table, we cannot talk about it. And I also said, in this very context that they accused to threaten them, this and this and this happened. And also, for them is important to say what happened. This was only the 3rd part, not the only one, and not the most important for me. Just a work on trying to contextualize in order for us to have means to discuss it. You want to say something?
Yes, I would like to say something or to add, because I would put it that way. It's neither an exclusively Indonesian affair, nor is it an exclusively German affair, because BDS is a global phenomenon. And it happens that in Germany one is more sensitive to that phenomenon for obvious reasons, and it becomes something like a state affair when it occurs. But what we see today is that it has become, like in the left, progressive, engaged circles in the art field, something like hegemonic, meaning that that everyone takes it for granted. No, I'm talking about globally. I'm not talking about Germany. So globally, it has become hegemonic. Everybody takes it kind of for granted in a silent way. So what we see is a silent boycott in most cases. We don't see an explicit boycott. In many cases, we see an explicit boycott, and in most cases, we see a silent boycott, so that Jewish Israeli artists are not invited, partially on ideological grounds, and partially on the ground that if you invite one and they are taking Israeli state money for it in whatever way, you run into trouble, people will protest in front of your doors, and so on and so forth. You will be mobbed on the internet and the social media, and you know this, so you don't invite them. Even though, not for hatred of Israel, just for not getting into trouble, for pragmatic reasons. This is also the background of the so-called Weltoffenheit letter of the German cultural institutions. It's not that they are all anti-Semites, it's simply they don't want to get into trouble. You know, it's a pragmatic thing which ends, but at the end of the day, in not inviting Jewish Israeli artists. So that's a global phenomenon. You can find it in New York. You can find it. So it's not simply a German phenomenon, but Germany, in that sense, is like a litmus test. So because there, it becomes obvious. It becomes a scandal. It becomes overground. People start discussing it. The Bundestag suddenly has a resolution. Other people writing a letter. By the way, I'm in favor. Have you seen how many letters were written? I'm in favor of a moratorium of open letters. So nobody should sign any open letter anymore for at least 1 year to get down from this stupid. It's also some sort of antagonization of black and white images, of the idea of friend and enemy in terms of anti-Semite or racist. So if you criticize anti-Semitism, if you criticize BDS, you immediately become a racist, and so on. That's the discourse in which if
you criticize Israel, you become anti-Semite.
So that's exactly it, yeah.
So you're also playing the game. So this is the constant back and forth ping pong. So we are playing table tennis, and this is something which happened in that discussion. You can really see it very well in what Nora presented. So it's not a linear timeline. It's a case of table tennis.
And the only thing I want to say, you might think it's totally biased on the German side, but I really tried to bring the main point that were important for my friends on both sides there and bring their main quotes there, because of course, like I guess all of us, I have friends on both sides and I get all their angriness and all that on Facebook. So that's what I actually tried, but maybe I failed.
But maybe the question is why is that so important? Or for whom is it important? I think that to put all the discussion, all the possible discussions about the documenta I think that we agree that has had a radical potential, to put all the discussion about anti-Semitism, anti-Israel, to have that discussion trumping up all the other discussions is already having a stance, is already taking a stance, no matter what your stance is. And I think that, wait a minute, I think that the question of anti-Semitism is a European question. The question of anti-Semitism, to think that anti-Semitism, to have that as a central question, as a question that defines your standing, it is a European question, and I think that when that question is being asked, for example here, it's a completely different question.
I just want, before I know you all want to say something, I just want to answer that. And I want to tell you, I deeply believe that it's to make it the only thing and the most important thing is one side of the ping pong. I totally agree with you. To not talk about it, leave it as an elephant in the room, is the other side of the ping pong. And what I actually tried is to give more space, and what we tried together is to give more space to what it actually is about, without, by purpose, and because I think this is also a stance, not talking about the discussion. I think the most difficult is to try to do both. And this is what I advocate for.
Yeah, Ivor Stodowski. I would like to go on from what you just said, is to broaden the Kampfzone, as somebody would have said, right? I mean, you have to, I mean, I don't think it's actually only BDS. It's certainly not only BDS. It's not only that that is a global phenomenon, it's anti-Semitism. And you know, the history of Jewish oppression throughout the world. And you have to understand how this happened. This is where I agree with you. You have to go to Indonesian history. Yes. Why is there anti-Semitism in Indonesia? And I don't think that actually the Israeli role in Suharto's regime was actually in any way very significant compared to that of the British and others, or the Germans, or the Americans being the most prominent. So to make that as like one of the most kind of visible ones would be, you know, kind of disproportionate. Pardon me. But let me finish. You could talk later, okay? I think I'll just finish. Oh, okay, okay. I just didn't understand. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to understand the history of anti-Semitism in Indonesia, right? And so this is what would interest me as a product of this discussion about Documenta, and I have a lot to say about Kassler and everything else too, if I had a chance. But is to say, well, we're going to use this opportunity, and they certainly are. The entire, you know, pro-Palestinian movement, and with the POC movement and Black Lives Matter, they're all getting together and very, very mobilized right now to turn this into the issue of our time, to make us go either this way or that way. And that's where this elephant in the room has to be addressed. I agree with Nora on that. But we have to say, but why are they anti-Semitic? Why does it say in their passport of like 1.5 billion people that there's only one place in the world you can't go? And that's here. 1.5 billion people can't officially come here. And maybe we should investigate that. Why is this the only one, right? And that is a question of, you know, like when, from a German point of view, I kind of had to think through it very, you know, that German perspective of when they had to boycott Jewish shops in Germany in the Nazi period. Today we're boycotting, the one thing we're boycotting is again the Jewish state. Whether, you know, you didn't like the Jewish capitalists because you're a capitalist yourself and you hate capitalism because you're doing it in all this kind of projection of your own fear of yourself, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so, okay, just can I add one more thing? I'll talk about Kassel later, perhaps. But I think this expansion of the Kampfzone is very important. Okay, so okay, then I'll talk about Kassel because I liked your point about infrastructure, right? And the turn to infrastructure. So the idea that it's no longer just representation, but understanding of the structure of participation, the structure of curating, the structure of funding. Now, that's what nobody has really done in Kassel, is to understand why the hell was Kassel bombed? This tiny little, beautiful little provincial town. Well, it was bombed because it was an arms factory, right? It was a massive, massive arms industrial complex of the Nazi regime, and it had to be destroyed. And that has never been addressed properly, right, by Documenta. There have been some attempts to do so. But I think this is where the infrastructural point, from the point of the Huffman story, is very important. It's a forgetting process. It's not an Erinnerungskultur. It's a Vergessenskultur, trying to rebuild and kind of say, well, it never happened. We rise from the ashes. And not remember that infrastructural problem.
Thank you, Ivor. כן, בבקשה. ורק שאני אסוף איזה 3 שאלות, או אז אחת, הייתה שם עוד גלית, אוקיי.
May we put the elephant, may we expose the real elephant, okay, in the room. When I saw the title, the poster, who is anti-Semitic? My first instinct went to the fact that the last 3 days I'm protesting against the WHO, the World Health Organization, okay? So this question becomes double. Not ignoring, please, don't ignore the Judo-Nazis that exist in Israel, please don't ignore that Israel is divided now to two. Half that thinks that we are now experiencing here a second Holocaust by our own people, and the other half, which, well, half or not half, that think that comparing what is happening now to the Holocaust, to the first Holocaust, is disgracing or whatever. Okay? This is going on here. So when we are talking about art, that's supposed to be above all this, and just arbitrary exhibited in this country and this country and this country. And I liked when you talked about all the exhibitions that are happening in other countries, but the journalist refused to accept something else than Castle Documenta. So, what is the part of art for itself? Not necessarily Documenta. In relation to the social political storms that are going on in this world, which democracy is no longer a legitimate regime, because dictatorship is not by states, is by corporations, like health corporations, etc., weapon corporations.
Do you want to continue?
I would like to have some facts first to the timeline, and then I would like to comment to the student, just to say something that come out of what they're saying, and then I will say something about the BDS. So this is like the three things. So first, facts. Let's start with the letter that was published first in Iflux. It was a previous letter that vanished after a few hours and re-edited, which read totally different than the one that published. It's important because it's two different letters. Another fact that
what was it, the first letter?
it was I don't want to enter. Like, it was two letters. One was published before and vanished, and then published again. Like, edit in different way, more precise, and more dealing with certain thing in more kind of German knowledge, but from the first one. First one also was not written so well, but it's whatever. The one that managed to read it. If you want, I can send you. The second thing, it's the Taripad, the work that they did in 2002 was invited to a festival in Australia. The director of the festival was Peter Sellers, that he resigned from the festival because his idea for the festival the concept was, if Hitler went to an art school, maybe the Holocaust would not exist, and it was a promo for the festival with Nazi iconography on certain artists. So this festival is cancelled, and this is the banner that was in Documenta. It was the banner that prepared. You can find this information in the catalog of Taripad. So it's really in the beginning of the... so this is, I think, kind of to put things that it's... to add. I can add more, but I think this is kind of very date and easy to look at. For the student, they say something, few of them want to talk about iconoclasm. The other one talk about taking God down and bringing the group. So, like, listen to you, it sounds like, you know, we're taking the monotheism, we bring the polytheism, so we say reverse colonialism in one hand. But we know that how worked the candomblé or the ubanda, which is the power stays still in the Catholic Church. So it didn't really work, this combination. But I think the question is different. If we talk about shifting of power, God invented I would say, by men. And the same men that invented God invent also his relation and the privilege that he will get from God. Right? We are, yes, in most of the monotheism, we are we are in the image of God, or we are son of God, or whatever. So we have certain relation, and this is like theology, or the men rights, the French and the English one, based on this, what kind of rights men have. So who invent, this is my question to the student, invent this God that you find out in Documenta, that took down and bring the God of the group. The last one about BDS, has been active in different groups of BDS, and you know probably. I think it's the first time that if there is an elephant in the room, so it's also an elephant which is not in the room. It's the first time that if there is a BDS coming when there are no Israeli money, and it's like resonant all the time. It's never happened before, and it's never happened before that was any anti-Semitic image related to, as much as I know, my knowledge from, it's more my experience, related to BDS. So the question how this come without an Israeli and without, it's a question, without putting on Ruan Grupa being affiliated with any anti-Semitic. Maybe one quote that was very strange in one of the reviews that one said, it's very strange that there are anti-Semitic feeling like in Indonesia without any Jew. And this is, to read it, it's quite funny, because do you need really a Jew be there to become an anti-Semitic? And this is kind of misunderstanding of all the things that it exists without and not with.
Do you want to react?
I don't know if it's a reaction or if I'm now on the Shaul track, but I don't know, maybe it's because of the man who was God, or I don't know. I thought we could also talk about what would the future mean if we understand what we have seen as Lumbung 1 and not as Documenta 15. What would this be then? And I mean, of course, I dare to dream because it's imaginative, and this element of discussing anti-Semitism as well, for me, would be part of Lumbung 2 and 3 and 4. So just to learn to be able to discuss it together and to see, like, sexism, you know, it happens. It's not the end of the world that it happens, but it's also something that one has the right to address. Yeah, and to talk. But yes, but it was talked about the occupation. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's interesting. It is interesting that in Israel, where Jews are the majority, are the privileged, they are the privileged citizens of a country that dominates millions of subjects who are not citizens, right? When we talk about BDS and anti-Semitism, we talk about it. This is also part of the historicism. We talk about it. We don't talk about maybe the possible causes to BDS. We talk only about the BDS as if it is a discrete event or a discrete phenomenon that does not relate, that does not have a history, that does not have, so I think that that in a way, if we can think about the discussion about Lumbung 2, okay, so if we think about Lumbung 2, yeah, I want to go back to something that Oliver said, that in a way that in Documenta 11 the discourse was a post-colonial discourse, and the discourse was not the West and the rest, but it was a discourse of the liminal spaces and of the third zones, and Homi Baba and the West, and Okri Anvazur said the West is everywhere. And I think that in a way what Documenta 15 proposes along those lines, or in the structure, is that now the South is everywhere, or the South can be everywhere. So we can think about, we can take, we can look, experience collectives from the global south, while not being from the global south, but understand that the conditions under which those collectives act and create are conditions that can be very quickly can become our conditions of being. And the question or the challenge that this documenta proposes to us is to imagine that. So to imagine a world in which our conditions of living, our conditions also, climate conditions, social conditions, but also political conditions, are the conditions that we think that are away from us, or they are in a different place. So, and in that way, for me, yes, to go back to the timeline, for me to think about that timeline is try to think what would be a historical timeline which is not a Western or a Northern or a European. So how to tell that story? How to tell this story? Maybe the story of anti-Semitism, maybe the story of occupation of the Israeli army, maybe the story of US imperialism. How to tell that story from Indonesia, or from Nairobi, or from South Africa, or from Mali. And this is a challenge.
Can I respond immediately? Because I could not, agree more with you, and I feel very sympathetic to the idea of the South is everywhere. And I also think that this is the challenge of the Documenta 15. I'm very much in favor of it. On the other hand, it comes with certain costs. The West has certainly blind spots. In this particular case, but you can also clearly see that there are blind spots. Because of what I would say precisely the shift from the post-colonial to the decolonial, which in the case of Documenta 15 consists in the fact that locality is always very important. This is a criticism Hito Steyr made against Documenta 15. Locality is always, so all the communities, all the collectives bring their local knowledge. It's what they present is very much goes very much back to their local struggles in their own locality and so on. Now, Documenta 15, so I can agree that, you can have the idea, I don't care. It's a very subversive approach by Ruangrupa. I don't care about Germany. I don't care about their particular problems. They are not my problems. This is the West. We are coming from Indonesia or from any other place. And therefore, I don't care about this locality. If I care about the locality, then only about local groups in Kassel in their own whatever they do, their micro economies and so on, but not about the general context of where I am. So the criticism against Documenta 15 or Ruangrupa is that they simply didn't care about the context in which their own event took place. And so the decolonial thinking is as if you could carve out that space of the West and abandon it, leave it somewhere. You don't need to take care of that anymore. We are doing our own thing. And the problem with this is not only about BDS and so on. There's another case, which is the case of the war of the Ukraine, the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, which is not present at all at Documenta. Maybe you have one video and a few drawings by Jan Pershowski. Yes, yeah, Dan Pershowski. This is simply not, it doesn't exist. Why doesn't it exist? And I would dare to say it does not exist because they have thought it's not their business. It's a European business. It's not part of their business. Even though factually people in Africa are starving because of that war. And so it is a global business, but this mindset produces a blind spot. And I think all the, maybe also misunderstandings in the German context, all this, table tennis game is also partially an outcome of, the reluctance to really think about where you are, what the problems are here, because it's part of the West. And I think that's a real problem also, while generally speaking, I would agree with you.
Hi. Yes? Okay. I wanted to say something, first of all, to Shaul, that I think we don't have the option or the privilege to decide like what the discourse will be about the document. It's not like we can, you know, steer the boat. So it's, you know, it's coming up, and I agree with Oliver, what you said now. It's coming up because there were certain blind spots, and the authority and the hierarchy of the who decides what and where, who takes responsibilities for what, yes, from the steering committee to the collective to the artists. So there's, I think there's a lot of things that still need to be worked out in this kind of, because if we want to do this kind of decentralization and shift, but so we need to, you know, what you said also, Nora, the infrastructure, like rethink really deeply about the infrastructure. Maybe the steering committee that chose this, you know, the collective wasn't aware or was aware and didn't care about what would be the implications, because I think that it's pretty easy to see this, you know, how this would play out. It's not that difficult for someone who...
I would like to share a story, actually, but you want to finish?
Yes. So that's the first point. The second point is about care, I guess, and also, Oliver, you just spoke about, like, even if, you know, the hierarchy is different, the collective is not necessarily, you know, it's not this kind of pyramid where the star curator above and all these, you know, artists underneath. So it's a different kind of decentralized model, and it's more, participatory, collective. But still, from what I hear, and Nora, from your pictures, I saw one thing, I heard a bit different things from another person. People, I don't know, felt hurt. So I don't know, you know, it could have been this strange party graffiti thing that happened, and everything was tied together in this kind of paranoid situation. But people, if they were paranoid enough to think that there was this death threat, I guess there's reasons to be paranoid. So I think we really need to figure out this idea of care so that people, artists, aren't exposed to you know, to the problematics of decentralizing the authoritative, curatorial, whatever, power structure.
I have just one sir. No, stop.
So take this.
Okay. Just about paranoia and so on. Yeah, that's a way of thinking about it. But you know, I'm a political scientist, and I have a very sober picture of what's happening and what political strategies are. And for me, it's very clear that these so-called death threats has first been spinned into death threats. It's a spin. It's also it's a PR campaign. It was released as a press official, you know, by Documenta as an official press release, that there were presumably death threats against the artists, particularly the Palestinian artists. Now, everyone acquainted, and Nora pointed it out, everyone acquainted remotely with hip-hop subculture. So I'm too old to be a skater, but I'm not that old, you know? So you know that 187 is this penal code thing, which is very common among a macho youth culture. You know, it's about the facts. It is about the facts. No, sorry, it is about the facts. You know that THC means cannabis. You know what a smiley is. And you know that Peralta, which was claimed to be a totally obscure female Spanish fascist, young fascist, they, in the press release, said, most likely the sprayers meant this Spanish fascist. Nobody in Germany knows this totally obscure Spanish fascist. But in youth culture, you know that Peralta is the name of a skateboarder, is the name of a very famous skateboarder who then had his old clothing company for hip-hop skateboarders and a skateboard. So if I find this in a youth cultural context where there's a club on the ground floor, how do I come up with the idea that this must be a fascist and this is going to be threatening me as a death threat? And this has been used up till now not only to terrorize their own artists. So what happened was, it's not paranoia. It is the press release and the campanization and weaponization of these events which terrorized the artists of Documenta who believed that there is a death threat. And also was spread around the globe so that people in the art field who I meet wherever tell me, you know, that this is really terrible. There is a death threat in Kassel. Can one go to Kassel to the Documenta? Is that safe enough, you know? So this really worked very, very well. And I'm really astonished by this uncritical reception of whatever comes out of an official press release and of statements of persons involved who weaponized this incident, just taking it for granted by journalists, by everyone in the art field. So that's my point.
I add now two affective dimensions, because I listened to you and I heard that you wanted to talk about the affective dimension of it. I add maybe something to that, and then my story that I want to share with you is both a bit kind of maybe too affective, but I do it. So one is, the thing is that, you know, there is actually deadly racism in Kassel. In the last years, people have been killed. I mean, we know neo-Nazis have killed first Sorry, I'm so sorry, because it was important for me to talk about it and couldn't talk about it, but yet now I can talk about it. So, first of all, we all know that neo-Nazis have killed Halit Yozgat, a young man in an internet cafe in Kassel. I think 7 or 8 years ago, and some years ago, I think 2 years ago, a politician have been killed by neo-Nazis because he was on the side of migrants. So actually we live in a town in which a death threat exists. Racism exists in Kassel, and also I can tell you, because I lived there, anti-Semitism is alive in Kassel. Now, I said racism is very, very strong in Kassel, and I think I think that Islamophobia is part of the racism. The racism I like to call it racism actually, because it's a strong thing and organized, and has been targeting that by that many people who are Turkish and Kurdish and so on. So I would not say it's not Islamophobia, but I like to call it racism in this very case, and it's a deadly racism. And also anti-Semitism exists in Germany and also in Kassel. Now, what I want to also say is that actually not because of the art debate, not because of the Central Council of Jews. And what was a bit astonishing and also terrible for me, that with this death threat debate, something that is ongoing in this city, in a city that was bombed because of the weapon industry, in which the weapon industry still exists, in which the university campus is on the place where the weapon industry was, in this city in which racism is alive, the feeling of being threatened on the street that makes sense is related to a debate on art in the bourgeois media and the Central Council of Jews. I mean, for me, this didn't feel good. There was something in this too quick relation that didn't make sense to me. And there would have been a lot of promises of solidarity if this paranoia would be expressed in a different way. And the other story that I wanted to share is that I was actually in Kassel the day when the Taring Party work was scandalized. And it is a scandal, of course, and I was sitting in the night together with my friend, Miki Lazar, who is part of the Jewish community in Kassel and also part of the Documenta Forum, outside of the Ruru house. And we were talking and drinking, and of course we were sharing our thoughts, just like we are sharing our thoughts here, and many other people were there, and artists were there, and we were debating, and many people had COVID, and Isvanto came, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was obviously a terrible day in his life. I mean, can you imagine they prepared Documenta 15 for a long time? They obviously thought they are not anti-Semitic, they really thought it, then they realized that in the center of their show is an obviously anti-Semitic work. It was a shitty day of his life. So he came, he saw us, and the first thing he did was actually hugging Mickey and saying, just, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And we were sitting there and we were talking, what can we do? And then we thought about the idea of organizing a collaborative Lumbung-like tearing down of the artwork as a collaboration between the Jewish community in Kassel and the artists, Taring Party themselves, who would say, now that we realize what this is, we don't want to have it here anymore. We actually want to tear it down. This was a potential of a moment. But this moment was not possible for exactly what you said, a certain hegemony in this moment, and the Documenta institution did not even speak with Ruangruppe anymore. Apparently, they just decided to tear it down on their own, and that this will be done behind the backs of Ruangruppe. And Ruangruppe feel that this was a stolen moment. This was not possible. It was not possible to do it together. And I wanted to share that because I think it's worth to think about Lumbung too as a place where we do that together.
Okay. So I would say one comment and one story. The comment is that it's a comment about PR and about political PR, because the political PR didn't start with the question of funding. The political PR related to the Documenta started in January 2022, when a blog naming itself as the Jewish Council of Kassel said that the Documenta is anti-Semitic. Okay, and yeah, one person. And at that time, was it anti-Semitic? So, and that comment got a lot of media, a lot of coverage, and that erupted the scandal, right? So we know that political PR works from many different angles, and it's not that only the question of funding had PR. But I want, as a closing remark, I want to tell the story of our conversation, Oliver, that we had a conversation in Berlin. At the beginning of November 2021. And we talked about the Documenta, of which we knew very little of, right? Because it wasn't still then, and we were excited about the possibility of something new that is going to happen there. And Oliver told me, whatever happens there, the German media is going to kill it. Because the German media, I hope I'm not telling a secret here, because the German media or the German art world is conservative, and wants it to fail. It's an experiment. It's a decolonial experiment. It's an experiment in decentralization. It's an experiment in communal and collective art understanding, and whatever happens, the German media is going to name it as a failure. And I want us to think about that comment, which I took it very seriously, and what actually happened. And I want to say that there is a line between that projection, that whatever happens, there are going to be very conservative, hegemonic forces that are going to call that Documenta failure, and that happened. And it happened with the pretext of, anti-Semitic, anti-Semitism, that as we know, anti-Semitism is always, there is always anti-Semitism. It's true. It's true. There is always anti-Semitism is a condition, and it's a Christian European condition that conditions the lives of people in Europe and elsewhere, of course. And I think that there is a line between that projection and what actually happened, and we need to think about it.
But now I have to at least have a short reply, because paradoxically something, and one has to be very precise here, because it's that the German media used anti-Semitism as a pretext to kill it. It is true that every documenter in the beginning, I mean there might be exceptions, the German art criticism in the media, especially in the newspapers, is very conservative, and it will not be understood, and it's not, arty enough, and so on. And therefore, that happens. Now, in this case, something else happened, because it has to do with precisely the moment of the so-called death threat. The so-called death threat PR killed the whole debate, because, and even the mayor of Kassel reflected it on the German Council of Jews, on the Central Council, because then the argument was made, you see what happens if we are attacked by the media, there's a huge campaign, and where does all this end? In people wanting to kill us. And in that moment, the whole debate was quiet. In their language, one would say it was silence. And nobody talked about this anymore. This was the moment, you can see it in the newspapers, where this discussion on anti-Semitism was in actual fact off the table. And there were a few quiet days. Then there was an opening. And then the media, the newspapers, were actually presenting it from neutral to actually quite affirmative. So everyone was in good mood at the opening. This reflected in the media, even in the Frankfurt Zeitung, which was one of the most critical ones. You had a very, very nice open review where they had a short mentioning of this anti-Semitism debate of before, and then they said, okay, that's very fine. Because now people come and say, you see, that happens when the South is presented in the North or in Germany and so on. They simply don't want to see it. I think that's a mistake, because there is an interest there. The interest might be there because of the wrong reasons, because of exoticism or whatever. There might be many reasons why people want to see it. So it's not a general enmity towards positions from the global south. But then something else happened, and that changed everything again, and it was the Taring Party incident. So this changed again the whole debate. And suddenly it was again on the table. And from then on, everything escalated. But it was nearly off. The debate was nearly gone. Everything could have developed completely different without Taring Party. And I think that one needs to keep this in mind. I think I could show it when we look at the newspaper clips.